Hello everyone, and welcome to Mental Health Month and today's session, Unlock the Power of Trust with Glenn Robitaille. I think we'll just give folks another minute to join, and then we'll start. Just as a reminder, we'll be sharing the recording of today's session next week. So you'll be able to share it with friends and family that are interested in learning about this important topic today. If you have any questions for Glenn as we move through the session, please use the Q&A to share them. We'll be checking in there for questions, and we'll have some time at the end to bring yours forward for Glenn to respond to. So thanks again for joining us for today's session, Unlock the Power of Trust with Glenn Robitaille. And as we move through the session, don't forget, if you have questions for Glenn, please include them in the Q&A, and we'll grab them from there and bring them forward for him to answer. Hey, so it looks like we've got a lot of folks who've joined us already. So Glenn, thank you for offering this session today. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
And welcome to everyone who's online. Can you please explain what the trust continuum is and how trust progresses through different levels?
Yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
there we go. We've got your slide to share there.
So some years ago, when I was in private practice and doing a lot of counseling with relationships, trust is often an issue when problems result in personal relationships. So I discovered a lot of times people have different meanings around trust and are looking for different things. There's a lot of miscommunication about what trust exactly is and how it can be improved. So I came up with the 3 levels of trust as a way of explaining to people the work that's required in order to have trusting relationships. What people often think is that trust is a feeling that you have about someone, when it's just equally an action that you take. I could say the same about love. That love is definitely a feeling in many cases, but feelings fluctuate, whereas actions can remain consistent. And so it's the action that supports the feeling, and the same would be true when it comes to trust. So if you look at the idea of the primary level of trust, there are times when we give people a chance to earn some trust equity with us. So we're giving them a chance. We don't necessarily know whether or not they're trustworthy. We feel kind of obligated to extend them a level of trust, whether we're feeling comfortable with it or not. And often we're not early on if we are not familiar with the person and how trustworthy they are. So there is a level of risk that goes at the primary level. And we either can extend this to others are extending it to us as well when they give us a chance to earn trust with them. And I like to use the example, if you're a truck owner, not everybody has a truck. And so if you need to go to the dump, people who have trucks are often hit up by people who don't have trucks to borrow their truck to use to take things to the dump or whatever the case may be. And so if someone asks me and I feel obligated due to my relationship with them or being a relative of some kind, and I allow them to take my truck, I'm doing a primary extension of trust. I'm giving them an opportunity to let me know whether or not that was a good idea on my part. So let's say I lend my truck and it comes back, it's full of gas, it's cleaner than it was when I gave it to them. Now I've learned something. And this is the personal level of trust where now I have some personal knowledge of past performance that informs future decisions that I make around extending further opportunities for the person to prove trustworthiness in areas of mutual importance. And generally, the degree of risk that we'll take at the personal level is proportional to the amount of trust equity that we have gained with that person. And I would say that in most relationships, the more casual relationships, we're basically functioning at the level of extending primary and developing personal trust. And for many relationships, that's about as far as it goes. Then there's this third level that I'm calling the perfected level, where you've had so much personal trust gained, so much relationship-based trust has been earned, and such a reserve of trust equity that it's no longer a front burner issue. You just kind of believe in the person to the degree if somebody told you something that didn't fit with your view of that person or how you view their behavior, you probably wouldn't believe it until you had some evidence. And you can probably think of a handful of people in your life that you would have that much trust with, that it's not something that you actually stop and think about anymore. You just trust the person because of their character. So perfected level is a character-based. It's not necessarily the equation of having earned more trust because of the way you've performed in some way. Interestingly, when I was doing a lot of relationship counseling, there was a breakdown in fidelity. There was a certain amount of time where a person who had broken trust was willing to do what was necessary to try to earn some back. And then you get to the place where they wanted a perfected level of trust again, based on the fact that they had done their penance. And it just doesn't work that way. It takes a long time to develop a strong level of trust, and it takes very little to tear it down. And when that happens, you don't go back to where you were. You go back to the beginning, and you're getting opportunities to show that you've changed or that something's changed in the way you're thinking or acting. And so you move through the same levels of primary, personal, and then hopefully at some point the perfected level. And the only other thing I'll say is that if you can't think of a lot of people in your life where your trust is so high that you would call it a character-based trust that really doesn't have much qualification to it. You just believe in the person. You're not unusual. Most people can only name a few. So those are the levels of trust. This is the lens that I use when I talk about trust. And hopefully you will have questions and stories that you'd like to share so we can apply this. And if you have any questions about the actual levels of trust, I'm happy to hear those as well.
So that leads me to a question
Yeah.
for you, Glenn. Tell us how each of these levels of trust can impact our daily interactions.
Well, in every relationship we have where we're being counted on and we're counting on other people to perform in some way, and that happens in the workplace just about every day. And if you're working in a clinical setting like we are here at Waypoint, when you're working with patients, there's the extension of trust that they give to us in terms of earning trust with them. So these levels are always at play. And so we have to see that the interaction between us and another person, when we're extended trust or when we're extending trust, is our opportunity to be seen either as trustworthy or not. And so every interaction is contributing in some way to the perception of trustworthiness. You can't separate the two. Trust and trustworthiness are kind of married to one another. And so when trust becomes an issue within a relationship, both trustworthiness and trust are on the table. And so every day, I think, we're in situations where we're extending people primary trust, or we're being extended primary trust. And it's important when that's happening and we're conscious of it that we realize that the trust equity is completely based on that. And if I could say one other thing, I like to compare it to like a game of poker, where when you're interacting with people with trust, primary and personal level of trust, you're gaining a number of chips with them. And so you're collecting chips by your faithful interaction, your trustworthiness. when you spend your chips, when you're maybe going to the wall on an issue or making some kind of a corrective statement, every time you are spending trust equity, you're depleting that. And so you're spending trust equity, you're losing chips. And if you haven't got enough chips and you're overplaying your hand, pretty soon you're going to need it and you won't have any trust left. So you have to gain enough trust equity to be able to play your hand with something that maybe requires you to go to the wall and be confronting someone. Like I remember when I was first hired with Waypoint, I told our CEO that she wouldn't have to wait for someone to tell me what I thought. If I had something to share with her, I'd be in her office and sharing it with her. But I also made it clear I wouldn't be there very much because in my role, I could be there every day. I could be in the office of the CEO raising some issue. I try to decide which mountain to die on because I realize that every time I go there, I'm spending my own trust equity. And if I do it too often, there'll come a moment when maybe she'll figure out that the problem here is Glenn Robitaille. He's bringing me all of these problems. So I want to make sure if I'm spending my trust equity that I'm doing it on something worthwhile. So, there's that kind of a dance that's happening in relationships all of the time. So that's another dynamic with trust that when you spend trust equity, you have to spend some time gaining it back again because the reserve isn't permanent.
Mhm. That's a really interesting way to look at it. And maybe you can dig in a little more and help us understand how the stages of trust can help us build stronger personal and professional relationships.
Well, it begins with the idea that nothing gets better in terms of trust if you don't extend some trust and give people the opportunity to earn some trust equity. And there's always some nervousness around taking risks with individuals. The only way you gain more trust with an individual is by actually extending them, giving the opportunity to prove to you that you were wise in doing that. There's of course a difference between trust and naivete. So I'm not suggesting that when we have information, we should continue to give people opportunities to, come back and do over again what they did in the past. Trust functions that way where you'll give people about as much room as they've earned over time, and sometimes they haven't earned enough to be trusted. And I would work with individuals, for instance, who'd experienced a form of abuse in their life. And it's quite common for people to suggest that when you don't forgive the person who abused you, what you're really doing is condemning yourself. And so your way out of the pain and suffering is to forgive them for the act. But most people aren't able to do that easily. So I like to distinguish it from there's a difference between forgiving someone who's not asking for forgiveness and the one word that you might use for it is grace. And grace sometimes means unmerited favor. So you're telling a person not what you did does not matter. You're saying, I no longer am going to hold you accountable for this. I release you. And when you release a person from the expectation that they're going to improve or that they're going to be repentant or they're going to change, when you release them from that, that's when you're releasing yourself. But forgiveness, really, most of the time, for it to be something that functions well in a relationship, there has to be some ownership of whatever the failure was that caused the problem. And you see this with couples. You can't expect someone to extend trust again unless there's been some acknowledgement that what I did was harmful and painful. And then maybe I'll give you the opportunity to earn back some trust with me. So anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on that. We have to begin with extending a primary level of trust. Sometimes we have to decide whether the evidence suggests that that's a wise decision on our part. There's a difference between extending trust and being naive. And as Angela Mayu said, when people tell you who they are, believe them the first time. And so when people tell you who they are and you know that that's something that's placing you or someone you love at risk, you don't give them a second opportunity to hurt you again. But when they blow it and everybody blows it, it's good to give people a second chance when it seems to be wise. That's a long answer to that question. I hope I somewhere got near it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that leads into another question I have beautifully. So, how does trust or the lack of it affect our emotional well-being?
Well, there's like any negative emotion that we entertain does work against our own. Uh, it does raise cortisol levels, does create adrenaline, does do things that are harmful to our own ability to resist and uh, uh, fight disease. So, uh, being able to have people in our life that we trust is helpful at every level. When we talk about uh, the inequities of mental health funding and how we still haven't figured out that when you give people good mental health care, it affects the continuum of health throughout life. And so it affects other areas of health care. If people are doing well in their minds, they'll do better in their bodies in most cases. People heal better and faster when they're feeling supported, and that's true in relationships as well. So if we're carrying negative energy, it's affecting us physically and it's affecting us emotionally, and it is taking something from us. So there are ways of deciding whether how you deal with the lack of trust with an individual when you can't trust them, and ways of extending trust. And for me, if you're going to extend trust, you start at the primary level and you give the person opportunity to gain back some relational trust. And hopefully at some point in time, they'll get to a place where you got a view of their character that makes it not a front burner issue any longer. Uh, that's my perspective on that.
Glenn, in what ways does trusting others help us feel safer and more secure, both emotionally and mentally?
Well, it's the one thing we can control. So, trusting someone who is asking for our trust, and it's a reasonable extension of trust, is what uh, gives us opportunity to gain further trust down the road. Suspicion, like if you think about it in your own life, what mental well-being or benefit have you ever gotten from being angry? And what benefit have you ever gotten uh, from experiencing fear? And what benefit have you gotten from being mistrustful? We need to be wise, and we need to read the tea leaves correctly when it comes to these things. But negative emotion affects us not only emotionally, but affects us physically and spiritually and in every other way. So, uh, it's not cut and dried. I mean, we're dealing with real relationships. There are real risks. We have to be wise in the way that we extend trust. But all things being equal, if we have people in our life that we can trust, and those are the ones that we're counting on and spending time with, we're going to be doing better than we would be if we're in relationships that question our faithfulness, question our trustworthiness, and um, or aren't willing to give us any primary or personal trust in the way that we interact with them.
No. Um, are there, or how do our communication habits impact the trust that others place in us? And are there some effective communication strategies that we can use that helps build trust?
Yeah, well, one thing is when you make a commitment, keep it. So you gain trust by being trustworthy. That's the exchange. And part of being trustworthy is being willing to say the hard stuff when you're not willing to do what the person is asking. Like I have said, even to my boss, if I'm being asked to do something that I'm not going to do, rather than agreeing and then not doing it and hoping it's not noticed, which is sometimes a strategy people will use, if I'm not going to do it, I'm going to declare it right away. Sorry, I can't do that, and here's why. And maybe I'll be talked out of it, but it's my belief that it's best to have the right fight at the right time for the right reason, in the wrong fight at the wrong time for the wrong reason. And that's all you get when you aren't honest with individuals in your interaction with them, when trustworthiness is on the line. So when when people want me to trust them, I'm extending primary, personal, and hopefully gaining a perfected level of trust. When people are asking me to be trustworthy, my card to play is to do what I say, mean what I say, and have my words match my actions. And if I don't match my actions, it's really important to the establishment of trust to be able to own that honestly and do what's necessary to correct whatever happened. So it's not really that complex when you think about it. It's the same respect you would want given to you, you make sure you're giving to others. It's all the same human emotion, instrumentation, and everything that functions for everyone.
What if the relationship between the parties isn't balanced? So the dynamic is that one person in this trust relationship has more power than the other. How can people manage the communication strategies in that kind of situation?
Well, pretty well all relationships have an imbalance of power, and sometimes there's the person who has more power, depending on the topic of discussion or the issue at hand, changes. So having an imbalance of power isn't necessarily the problem. It's the abuse of that, where a person is not being respected. I remember an occasion when I was actually working in the States. I had taken a job down there, and I was seeing a couple. And it was one of those cases where there was a lot of passive aggressive behavior happening within the relationship. And the husband in this case was very passive aggressive. I remember him saying at one point in time, "Tell me what you want so I'll know where to drag my feet," to his wife, which was like really revealing of where his head was at. But she was constantly chirping at him, trying to get something that she needed. And I remember saying, the difficulty here, as I see it, and something you may want to consider, is spending some time getting assertiveness training. I'm saying this to the wife. And he laughed, and he thought this was hilarious because he thought that she was over assertive because she was always complaining about his. But what she wasn't doing was clearly stating what she needed from him so that he would know what she was expecting so he could actually meet that standard. And so sometimes what people really need is to learn how to express what they want and they need. And when there's an imbalance of power, the person who experiences less does need some skills to be able to say, no, this is like we teach people how to treat us. And if we can't teach them and it's painful and harmful to us, there are times when, there's one of the strategies of dealing with a bully is to extinguish the relationship. And while that may be a last resort, there are times, and that's probably the only answer. So anyway, those are some of my thoughts on power imbalances. The person who's being overpowered has to take control of that, and being assertive with our needs and what our wants are. We teach people how to treat us. We can't allow a person to do that, but we need to do it in a way that they can hear it as well. Hence my suggestion of assertiveness training rather than just reacting emotionally.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us an example of how trust can either evolve or degrade over time in a relationship?
Well, let's see. Let's use a work example. New person comes on the team. You have to extend to them opportunities to do part of the job and the work. You extend that opportunity as a primary level of trust. They perform well with the responsibilities that are given. You gain more. The organization notices. You're being asked to take further leadership training. Next thing you know, you're rising up up through the organizational chart, gaining more responsibility based on the level of trust that you've demonstrated and the trust that's being given to you. So the controllable piece when it comes to trust is being trustworthy. It is always that Uh, in terms of how you lose it, when people are counting on you to do something and you've made commitments and you don't follow through on those commitments, that's what compromises trust. And, there are the big ones that can cause an erosion of the relationship immediately, but there are smaller ones as well, where you're given your word to do certain things and you just don't do them. And over time, those things add up, they compile, and then pretty soon you've lost trust. You see this a lot with parenting, where you get so many opportunities to demonstrate in a practical way that you're supporting your kids. You're there for their games, what's important to them. You're telling them what they need to hear in terms of understanding how you see them in the world, so they're feeling built up. You get so many opportunities to do that. When you're doing that, you're slowly and consistently building some trust equity with your kids. When you don't do that, you're slowly and consistently creating an impression that maybe you're not the person they need to go to and they need some support and help in their life. So, there are the big things that demonstrate it, and then there are small things that add up over time. And, everybody blows it now and then. It's easier to get through a mistake with asking for forgiveness if you've been doing the small stuff all along the way and building up a reserve of trust equity and some character-based stuff. So that the long-winded, simple answer,
Mhm.
my perspective.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's great. Can you tell us a bit about what role vulnerability plays in progressing through these stages of trust?
Well, when the word trust implies that you're being vulnerable and you're risking your own safety when you're extending to someone an opportunity. So yeah, there's if you want to put it on a continuum, vulnerability plus knowledge equals intimacy. So if I want to have intimacy with someone, I have to make myself vulnerable by letting myself be known, and I have to share information about myself uh, that I'm not necessarily sharing if I don't see you as someone worthy of hearing that information from me. It's the exchange of making myself vulnerable and giving information about myself that develops intimacy. That's the formula. Vulnerability plus knowledge equals intimacy. You can't have intimacy without vulnerability. So when you have a lot of secrets, like in a primary relationship where you're holding a lot of things back that don't explain why you think the way you think, feel the way you feel, react the way you react, that has an impact on the level of intimacy that you will have. So yeah, it's what you see, it's what you share about yourself, but it's the level of vulnerability you risk with yourself that sets it up to result in intimacy. I have another word
Um,
for that, by the way, a good diagram around vulnerability plus.
oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, how can we recognize when our mental health is being negatively affected by trust issues in our relationships?
Well, my question would be, how do you not recognize it? Because you're not going to be feeling very good. Uh, there's so many ways that can happen. You need to pay attention to simple things like your physical reactions as a starting point. Like your body reacts to the people that we're working with and the people that we're relating to. It's a great book by Gabor Mate, When the Body Says No. That kind of explains this mind-body connection really, really well. And oftentimes your physical reactions to individuals will tell you something before you're actually figuring it out and put any hooks on it and explain why you're feeling the way you feel. You'll feel things before you'll actually know things. So you pay attention to increased heart rate, perspiration, clenching of the jaw, increase in heat of the body, all of those things that indicate discomfort. So there's the physical reactions, there's the emotional reactions, and Um, and then, of course, our thinking is affected by it as well.
So maybe just to explore a little further. So can you tell us how that broken trust might show up in our mental health symptoms and what we might do to try to, heal ourselves from how we're feeling? Or, um, you talked about the physical piece. Are there things that we can do um, when we get that feeling, when we
Yeah.
have those physical feelings?
So my perspective is feelings are not chosen, they are what they are. You choose actions, you do not choose feelings. There's no judgment around a feeling. People generally get the emotional reaction from us they've earned, at least based on our perception. Sometimes they get a reaction from us they haven't earned because we're not perceiving what's happened correctly. We're thinking differently about it, but whether we're thinking incorrectly or correctly, the emotion we're experiencing is neutral. It is what it is. You don't choose your emotions. So uh, it's actually unhealthy to try and stuff the emotion. If you're having it, it's more important to drill down on it and appreciate it and understand it than it is to try and get rid of it, because that tends to make it stronger. So we want awareness of our emotions so we can choose our actions based on that. And so, yeah, it's really bad advice to give people, to tell them, that they shouldn't feel the way that they feel, and you should feel this way instead. No, you should feel exactly the way you feel, because you're feeling that way based on the way that you've experienced the world, this relationship, and whatever it is that has happened. Uh, where we have some opportunity is, and then once we have drilled down on the emotion and made some decisions, we act on it in a way that is healthy for us. And healthy might mean giving someone another chance because we thought it through and we see that the relationship is worth that, and this uh, was an aberration from the expected. And there are other times when we might say, no, this is not something I'm going to give a second chance around. Like if a person was abused in their family setting, they probably aren't going to let their children be in that setting without being there with some protection. That would be a wise decision. You control what you can control, in other words. You learn from certain things. And uh, yeah, but that I think is what is important for people to reflect on, is you do not choose your feelings. They're neutral. They are what they are. I mean, you could have murderous feelings and there's nothing immoral about it. It just is what it is. Murdering someone, on the other hand, is immoral. That would be a problem. But you don't choose how you feel. You react based on your perception around how things really are. And that's what gives you your opportunity to decide what your next step is going to be.
Okay. Um, are there some key traits or actions that you can share with us that will help others build trust in us?
Well, if you extend trust to others, generally they will extend trust back to you. So that's the controllable piece. And uh, uh, generally people will rise to the level of trust that they're given. When we do not give people an opportunity to be trusted, and again, let me put this in the context of parenting. Parents have to trust their children. You can't put so many safeguards around them that you're trying to protect them from every little thing that's going to happen. If you want your children to feel trusted, you have to extend trust. And generally, if you're giving them that confidence, I trust that if you go to this party and this stuff is going to happen, I trust you to make a phone call, or I trust you to make the wise decisions because I know who you are. So you take that idea. Generally giving trust is going to do better than if you're telling the kid going out the door, I'm going to be checking you when you get home to see whether or not you've been drinking, and I'm going to go through your pockets and make sure there's nothing in there. I'm using this as an example, but there's ways that you can take that same action and put it across other relationships. Like when we talk about one of the things that people do that is bullying behavior in the workplace, micromanaging is bullying. spending too much time being scrupulous about what a person is doing is bullying. You're not giving a person the opportunity to rise to the trust that they've been given to do the role that they are. So if you give someone the space to do their role and you trust them to do it, you're going to get better performance out of someone who's believed in than you will for someone who you need to walk over there and look over their shoulder all the time and make them believe that you have no confidence in them. So yeah, that's what you can do is give people trust. And if they give you trust, rise to it. And most people will do that. People will rise to the level of trust they're given. If I could say one other thing about that, when people are in personal relationships and they're constantly expressing mistrust of their partner, what they're doing is they're creating a sense of, I'm not trusted by that individual. And they're actually setting up a greater risk for being untrustworthy than they would if they were constantly affirming, I believe in my partner. I believe in them. I trust them. I'm not worried. So yeah, that's what you can control, is giving people an opportunity. And if they rise to it, well and good. If they don't, then you're back to square one. You have to make decisions.
Um, are there ways that we can better assess how trustworthy we are in the eyes of others?
That's none of my business. That's the way I look at it. How people think about me is their business. My business is to be trustworthy. So I really don't think it's healthy to spend a lot of time worrying about what other people think about me. Or, people should not be worrying about what other people think about them. What people should be worried about is being the kind of person that they believe they are, and living that out, and then people have their own opinions. Of course, that's when I've been in a role, for all of my adult life, where I have opportunity to provide perspectives to individuals. And what I've found is that if people agree with what I'm saying, they tend to like me. And if they don't agree with what I'm saying, they tend to not like me. In either case, it has really nothing to do with me. It has to do with them and whether or not they agree with what I'm saying or not. So, they have to decide what they believe and think about me. That's their business. What they think, I really don't think is any of my business. So I think that's a healthy approach. Worry about yourself. Don't worry about what others think.
Okay, good advice. All right, so I think we're at the end of our session, and I've checked. We've got a couple of questions. Glenn, if you're open to them, I
Sure.
can read them to you. Okay, great. So, can you walk us through a process of improving our trustworthiness in personal and professional settings?
Well, that's a difficult one to say any differently than I've been saying. If you want to improve it, you have to take your opportunities where trust is extended and then be trustworthy in the way that you're responding and honest when you're not able to follow through. So, trust equity is built by being trustworthy. So if we're trying to gain the level of trust that we're going to experience from others, the only way we do that is following through with whatever trust is extended to us. And whether or not people trust us more is kind of up to them. The controllable piece is being trustworthy with the responsibilities that we're given or the opportunities that we're given with others. And if I could just add one thing to that, not everybody who's asking something from us really, we don't need to respond to everyone who's looking for something from us. We have some decisions to make around the amount of our own life force that we're going to extend. If you spend it here, you don't have it here. So we have to make sure what energy and availability and support that we're able to give, we're putting it in the right spots. Another lesson.
Yeah. And our next question is, what advice would you give to someone trying to rebuild trust in a relationship after it has been damaged?
Yeah, I think the first thing you have to really work through is whether or not the amount of damage that has been done is something that can be repaired or you want to repair. The worst thing a person can do is continue a relationship that they are not going to allow be repaired and hold it over the person's head for the rest of their life. That's not healthy for the person. It's not healthy for you. So, the when an injury occurs, take the step back and give your feelings and your emotions the time to be processed. As I said, people don't choose their emotions. They are what they are. So dignify them, respect them, and then spend some time thinking about whether or not this is a relationship that you want to be fixed, uh, and whether or not it would be healthy for you to do so. And then once you have, if you make that decision, that's when you can make it very clear, I'm giving you an opportunity to get back what we once had, and here's how it's going to work from my perspective. And you can think of it in terms of that you're going to do that you're obligated to do. Trust builds trust. So you have to extend trust with a wait and see attitude. You have to give opportunities to earn trust equity. And then when you earn trust equity, you have to extend more based on that. You would just allow it to grow naturally. The big decision is whether or not you're willing to do that. And the big decision is if they do these things, or you're able to get to a place where you can restore the relationship so that it's not hanging over their head for the rest of their life. And nobody wants to spend the next 10, 12, 15, 50 years saying mea culpa for a past failure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, those are the two questions we had, Glenn. Thank you so much for today, and thanks everyone for joining. I think you got an email with the link to download Glenn's slide, but I'm just going to share it again in the chat if you wanted to grab the slide. And watch for the recording link next week. And again, please feel free to share this with anyone you think would be interested in learning about this topic. And we're also going to find somewhere on our website where we can post it and people can come and grab it anytime. So thank you, everyone. Thanks again, Glenn. It was great to be able to do this event as part of Mental Health Month.
Great.